Yeah, we're on.
Good evening, everyone. You're all very welcome to this very special event tonight in conversation with Yanny Petters. And before I leave these two ladies alone, I'll just say a few words about them. Jean Ryan. Jean is an Irish art historian who has a special interest in artworks which are influenced by literature. This approach enables her to introduce Irish artists from eras as diverse as the 18th century through to contemporary practitioners who are still influenced by stories of any genre. Through storytelling, she has introduced people to artworks held in some of the best Irish museums, public galleries, art centres, private collections, and national institutions. Her work has taken her to places as diverse as Dublin Castle, Rua Red, Municipal Gallery DLR Lexicon, Christchurch Cathedral Dublin, National Design and Craft Gallery Kilkenny, and regularly here at the Olivier Cornet Gallery. Now, it's a bit difficult for me to sum up Yanny Petters in just a few lines, as I've had the pleasure of representing the artist since 2004, but I'll try my best. Yanny Petters has been painting exquisitely detailed studies of wild plants for the past 20 years, all of which from life. As well as working in oils and watercolors, Yanny also specializes in painting on glass, or verre églomisé, a technique she has been developing since her signwriting years. Field of Vision, the current show here at the gallery, is our fifth exhibition with us. Yanny is a member of the Watercolour Society of Ireland, the Irish Society of Botanical Artists, Visual Artists Ireland, Dublin Painting and Sketching Club, Signal Art Centre Society, and Dublin Naturalists Field Club. Her work is in many private collections and public collections, including the National Gallery of Ireland, the National Museum of Ireland, Shirley Sherwood Gallery of Botanical Art in Kew, London, and the OPW, to name but a few.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Olivier. I'd like to start by thanking Yanny and Olivier for inviting me to participate in this artistic conversation. And it's running in conjunction with your beautiful exhibition, Field of Vision. And over the next 15 minutes, what I'm hoping to do is, with you, to delve into your art practice and how you developed it, and also the influences that you have brought with you. Some of them go back 1,000 years, and some of them are more recent.
And I haven't been around that.
Yeah. But how they have influenced such a contemporary take on your beautiful work as a plant portraitist.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank you for agreeing to join us, because I love your approach to
thank you so much.
Your work and your writing and all. So
thank you.
I guess we get stuck
in. We get started. So the very first question was, what influences your work from other art movements?
Well, as you say, we can go back a long way. And when I first started looking at painting plants, I came across Patricia Butler's History of Botanical Art. And in it, there were lovely representations of herbals. And I was aware of the herbals, which are from the Middle Ages. They were engravings and drawings of mostly of wild plants, of course, because they were for medicinal purposes. And this was how medicine was made available back in the Middle Ages. So I loved the way the artists managed to squeeze a lot of information into a very small plate. They had to actually show all parts of the plant at all parts of the year, and make them so recognizable that you didn't end up poisoning somebody. So that then was like a springboard to my earlier work. And then I was very much aware of Celtic knotwork, and my mother would have been a great...
Can I show this?
Yeah, absolutely.
I just have an image of an
ancient
herbal book.
And my favourite plant, a dandelion.
Really?
One of my favourites.
So this is what they were like, but they really had a lot of information.
Yeah, and often they actually the illustrations might not be that good, so they needed a lot of text with them. So it was important for the artist to get as much information into the illustration as well, because most people couldn't read. So yeah, that led on to, or maybe in parallel, I was interested in the Celtic knotwork, and my mother obviously would have shown me the Book of Kells and various other designs, and she gave me a copy of the George Bain book of Celtic knotwork, which actually shows how the designs were made in terms of the mathematical setup of how to draw the Celtic knotwork. And we have a little illustration there.
Illustration here.
Hold it a bit closer there to the camera for them, lads.
But they're so intricate.
But most people would be familiar with the signature pages of the Book of Kells or the Book of Durrow. So often plant symbols were used. They were quite stylized, but it's mostly zoomorphic in the Book of Kells and the Book of Durrow. But I'd always try and find where they used shamrocks and different little plants, and olives and grapes were often represented. But
even in Irish texts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really? Okay.
Well, there's lots of import.
Right.
So yeah, and of course a lot of the monks would have travelled quite far.
Right.
So, and that also has a parallel with Art Nouveau, which I really loved from an early age. Again, probably my mother would have shown it to me. It would have been very common in galleries in Germany that where she came from. And you have one of my favourite ones, Alphonse Mucha. The artwork the plants would often be sort of pulled in different directions and interwoven, but also in a mathematical way, and that there was a lovely balance to how the design element, but the use of the plant in design. It's just I love the fluidity of the line.
Yeah, the Art Nouveau we were talking about, and we're just saying it was such a sensuous art movement at its time, and they used beautiful lines and curves in their work, whether in furniture or in drapery. But the thing, when I was reading about this, there's a line, and you could see it in your plants here, just this, the way these lines go up and curl, and that was used a lot in Art Nouveau. It's called the Whiplash line. Because the line has an energy and it brings you up, brings the eye up.
Yeah,
it's beautiful.
And often that you'll see that in design generally, that it's part of how we urge the viewer to see all parts of the composition. And then we talked about the William Morris and the arts and crafts movement, and again it was very much featured flowers and plants, and it often incorporated animals and birds as well. But I loved how they created pattern, because they were creating wallpaper, carpets, everything. And what I loved about the arts and crafts movement as well was the idea that practical things are beautiful, and that the practical things don't have to just look dull. They can actually have these beautiful. And again, Alphonse Mucha was involved in designing everything from furniture to spoons to whatever you're having. And it was the same in the arts and crafts movement. And of course, we know William Morris well, and Macintosh, who did the beautiful furniture and that, and stained glass and mirrors, everything really. It's fantastic.
Really beautiful. Really beautiful.
And then I just see that you have in your hand there this is what intrigued me about going to the Chester Beatty Library. My mother often brought me there. It was in Ballsbridge at the time, the early days, but the Mughal emperors' manuscripts, which had these beautiful borders which show wild plants, and they're often surrounded by a very fine line of gold, and just they're tiny. Like the book itself might be only 20 centimeters high, and that they've made these really beautiful, intricate little borders, less in terms of pattern, but quite random at times, but just making the plants precious, which is kind of follows through in my work as well, that I want wild plants or plants that we often disdain to be, that we're aware that they are actually precious.
Yeah.
Um,
When we were talking about this the other day, we were both saying that considering where these books were made for very rich Indian emperors, that they didn't put in animals, like they had elephants and tigers and lions, and they didn't use them. That you said that they exclusively used plants.
Well, not exclusively. Now they would have. There's plenty of illustrations of elephants and tigers and things, but they'd be in the center of the page.
Okay.
Whereas the plants are around the outside or within the painting itself.
Yeah.
It was the fact that they used plants and ordinary wild plants, which they could have been using. I mean, obviously at that time they were already cultivating exotic plants, so they could have used those, but they used all sorts of things.
Yeah,
a mixture.
Yeah. And finally, the last. Oh no,
not quite
it's
last.
not quite last.
Yeah, but
This
is probably one of my favorite paintings in the world. Is Albrecht Dürer, German painter, 1700s, I think. I did put a date on that, did I?
1500s.
1500s.
Yeah.
Well, when you think about it, he
Stunning.
was painting that in the 1500s when they were also doing the primitive herbals.
Yes, that's right.
And he was a great printmaker. But he was the first to actually do a painting of weeds. And the painting is called The Great Sod of Turf. And when you look at it, it's just full of that sort of intricacy of how things grow together, where botanical art, botanical illustration, which has a very specific purpose, which is to illustrate the plants for the purpose of recognizing them. Botanical art allows a little bit of artistic license and allows the creation of an environment within or around the plant, and maybe including insects or including blemishes and the life of the plant, whereas an illustration is a scientific thing. So that sort of would make the difference between the work I do, which is portraiture or botanical art, as opposed to trying to illustrate something for the purposes of science.
Yeah, because it was a knowledge-based art form, really.
Yeah.
It was there to distribute knowledge.
Very much so.
Yeah.
So
finally?
This one would lead us on to the technique. So how are we doing on our...
I think we're doing okay.
Points.
Fine. Yeah, come on, nice. So the next question it's interesting that like some of these practices, they go way back, like the Celtic knot, that's like a few thousand years,
that's 800
years. Yeah. And then you have stuff that's more contemporary.
It's a huge span of time.
That you have incorporated that has influenced your work.
Yeah. And I'm still looking at Japanese art, and even today I'd be looking at what modern botanical illustrators are doing and looking at how they're interpreting plants, because it'll be different again from what was done in the very scientific period of where we were illustrating plants not only for medicinal purposes, but because we're cultivating them and making hybrids, and it was for fashion. And you've heard of the tulip fever. That was a great story of again in the I think it was 1600s. They started cultivating tulips, and they discovered that certain tulips would get stripes or frilly bits and things. It was actually caused by a virus or a fungus in the tubers. So it was completely unpredictable. But it became a fashion, and people lost their houses and everything to buy these tubers. And it still happens. People do it for snowdrops. They fight over them. It's absolutely mad. But it's
having a barney over a snowdrop.
People still invest in these things because it's
rare,
fashionable. Yeah.
Wow.
So so Redoute was a famous illustrator of the tulips, particularly, and roses. He made really. I mean, they're absolutely stunning paintings, but they're very illustrative. So it'll be one stalk with a flower on it in an empty page, maybe with a frame around it. Whereas I like putting all the nitty-gritty in there
into it.
So yeah.
Well, good. Well, the next question then, if you're happy to move on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is the history and technique of Vera Eglomes.
Okay, Vera Eglomes is a name that is given to painting on glass to differentiate it from stained glass, because stained glass, most people would be very familiar with that because everybody's been in the church at some time in their life. And there was this collector called Jean-Baptiste Glomy who made decorative frames. So if you imagine you're framing a painting, but the glass would have a gold leaf design on the glass, so that when you mount the painting behind it, it has gold leaf on the glass as well as maybe on the wooden frame. So Vera Eglomes actually refers to gold leaf on glass, but over the years we've kind of allowed paint and other materials to come into it as a term to differentiate it from stained glass. And when you look at the different terms that run in parallel, in German it's Hinterglasmalerei, which is literally painting behind glass. In English, it's often called Reverglas or reverse painting on glass. So that tells you what it is, but it's also a mouthful. So I guess Glomy thought he'd get his name in there and he'd give it a term. So that it was a good way of making it stand out as a specific technique. So I got into it by working as a signer, and a lot of old signs. Well, we did a lot in the 1980s. I was working with a guy called Michael Gemmell, who set up a company called Sign Design. We did a lot of pubs all around Dublin and down the country as well. And they'd often have glass signs with gold leaf lettering, or they might have the glass might be marbled, or would look like marble, but it's actually painted onto the glass. And also we did a lot of pub mirrors, which would have plants and things incorporated into the design. So look at the Jamison mirrors, which have barley on them, or often they'll have shamrock designs and things. So essentially what one is doing in creating these works is painting in reverse on the back of the glass. So you're making every mark that would normally in a painting be made last, you're making first. Mm-hmm. So you have to really work in reverse. So that makes it a little bit, you really have to think about how you design the work, so that once you've put down brush marks and then you paint over them, you can't change things.
So it's very unforgiving.
So it's quite, you have to be quite calculating about how you do it.
Yeah.
So therefore, everything has to be designed first. So I would spend a lot of time doing drawings before I apply any marks to the glass.
So it's a very long process.
It's quite a long process. And also what I've done, which is a bit different from, if we go back to the technique as it was actually a folk art, and therefore not recognized in galleries and museums until very recently. And you can show the image of St. Peter there, which would be what would be typically done in this technique. So in the Middle Ages, farmers would make these little icons on glass. And part of the idea was the glass that they got was actually the waste glass from when windows were made, because the glass was the only way to make windows at the time was to blow the glass. So they blew these huge bubbles and then slit them open. And where the end, where the pipe is and where the lump of glass comes out of the kiln or out of the furnace, the glass would be uneven. So that bit of glass, so that the icons were actually quite small. They might be maximum 30 centimeters in height. That glass had a wobble in it, So if you painted on it, especially if you painted a saint on it, when someone moved it or passed by it, it was as if what was painted moved a little bit. So it had that extra little bit of excitement to it. So
it's amazing though that farmers would have taken up something like this.
yeah, but it was a winter income.
Oh.
And the whole family would be involved. So one person might do the outlines and another person might do the colouring in parts of it, or was good at doing flowers or whatever. So it's quite interesting. And it was particularly in Bavaria, it was a very common practice. So they would sell these then to the pilgrims coming from Italy, going to Northern Europe and that. So, but that wasn't the only area that this technique was developed. In China, it was very well known. You'll see it in India. Senegal actually has a glass painting school and has had for a long time. And in Europe, it was, in Britain, it became very popular in Victorian times, and they actually sent copies of they made copies of old masters onto glass, which is kind of a daft idea, but there are quite a few. I'm trying to remember the name of the artist, and we all know him, did paintings on glass, and I went to see them in the V&A, and they were actually in a box where they'd be lit from behind, probably with candles. So they had a semi-transparent aspect. Gainsborough.
Really?
And they're little paintings in a box. They're quite amazing. Landscapes. So there would have been quite a lot of paintings also done on fire screens. So Victorian women would have learnt these little techniques of embroidery and things like that, but they also did painting on glass. And as far as I know, with the type of paint they used, it was a mixture of lacquer, which would have been used a lot in Japanese work, and pigment. And the colours were quite dull to a great extent. They didn't really have the strong colours we have now. So the colours that have been used since the Victorian times and onwards, once we had coal tar colours, so when Henry Perkins made his great discovery of mauve, we then moved on to making colours from chemicals, and so much brighter colours, but also the key was that they were light fast. So that really changed art, all types of painting and art, because the light fastness meant there you had your sign writing paints, which could be out on the street, and so advertising panels, all that kind of thing, would last a lot longer than where you had water-based paint before, and it was fleeting. The dyes and the stains came from plants and animals before, whereas with coal tar you had a very permanent indigo and all those things. They are still not permanent, but anyway, you could go on.
But it's amazing.
But
it's such a beautiful technique. The way you use it, it's so
yeah.
beautiful.
Well, maybe to say about why did I go the way I did. When I worked in the sign writing field, we did a lot of panels, glass panels that were in the interior of the pub. So snob screens and things like that would be decorated. They might be acid etched or gold leaf designs. So there'd be lots of techniques within that. So I still thank Michael every time I do a painting for teaching me all these things, because it was such a wide range of techniques which I still apply. So when I then started developing the glass work, I often played around with engraving the outline or acid etching areas of the glass. And I discovered that by acid etching the shape that I'm going to paint onto, so the acid bites into the glass, so it gives a frosted effect. So it's a little bit like, if you touch it, it feels like tracing paper. It has a bit of a key for the paint. So I discovered that I could use watercolor pencils onto that surface. Really, it works quite nicely. And then I'd use the sign writing paint with that. So the sign writing paint is light fast and designed for glass. The watercolor pencils now, they are made light fast as well. And the acid would give me the possibility of painting away on something and working around, scratching around it on the shiny surface of the glass. And also it meant that I can put a plant have it in space. So I don't have to have a white background. Sometimes I do paint the background, but generally I would use the background, the clear background, to then make the plant cast a shadow behind it. So that's part of the key to my work being different from most other Verglamese work, is that I'm working with the light shining through the glass, but from the front, not the back. So the shadow gives it a sense of three-dimensionality.
Yeah.
And that shadow will move, like when the light passes by it, or when you walk past it, the shadow will change.
Lovely. And you work on paper as well as glass, and we were talking the other day about how these different materials let you do different things.
Yeah,
and they're very different.
I love doing really big work, and I always say to my students, work big and just use your whole body to draw. So that's a little more difficult with glass, because you're to some extent restricted in size just for portability. I was saying to Jean that I generally design my exhibitions so that all my work fits in my car.
That's right.
And that's just a practical thing, financial element.
Yeah.
But I have done really big drawings in the past, and I loved kind of going from big to small to big to small. So there's lovely freedom in working really big.
Well, when you say really big, how big?
Well, I think one of my biggest drawings is nearly 3 meters high.
Wow.
So I'll buy a roll of paper and I'll fix it to my easel high up, and roll it all out, and then I generally paint from the roots up, not knowing how big it's going to be. And the plants often want to be bigger, and that's why this exhibition was a bit of a challenge to design the plants into the shape of the space without squashing them.
Yeah.
Because all of them are different sizes. So that was a little bit of me kind of using the Art Nouveau and the mathematical thing of trying to work out how can I still make them look like they're free growing plants, but constrain them in this shape.
Yeah.
So most of my paintings would be a lot bigger, but this was a bit of a sidestep.
And do you find then that working really big, and does that loosen you up then?
Definitely, yeah.
Literally, your thinking and movement. And everything.
Yeah, using the whole body to draw. And just that idea that you can, start crouching and end up standing on the tip of your toes to make a line which becomes part of a tree. It's very satisfying.
And would you do pencils or charcoal?
Yeah, I actually found these beautiful black pencils. They're meant for drawing on glass, but or marking, when you mark glass to cut it. But they're really saturated black, and they are actually water soluble as well. So I can draw with them and then wet parts of them and drag them and things. So very effective.
And what do you do with these big paintings?
I roll them up and put them in the attic.
Have they ever been seen?
Oh, they have, yeah. I had an exhibition in Wicklow County Council buildings, and it was all about the wetland plants in the nature reserve in Newcastle, right. Called Blackditch. And so, yeah, they've been seen a few times, but like that. They would actually go quite nicely on Ollie's wall sometimes.
They sound amazing.
I'll have to unroll them and see that the mice haven't eaten them or something.
Yeah. But to go from very big to small,
yeah,
it's a completely different way of thinking and using and manipulating paint and just, as you say, trying to get something into a smaller space. But also, I imagine when you're doing something really big, maybe to allow it to fill that space is brave as well.
Well, the first mark is always the hardest.
Yeah.
Once you go in there, you just have to keep going. But yeah, I feel in my mind I apply the same movement, regardless of how big or small.
Wow.
But at the same time, yeah, I'm really looking forward to doing some really big stuff next.
Wow. And
After doing this
when we
stuff.
were saying, you were just saying, you know, about glass, that you'd love to do some site-specific work with glass because you could use bigger glass.
Yeah, I'd love to actually be able to work. You know, there's so many places with huge glass panels as
Yeah.
walls, and they could be. You could just do fabulous stuff.
Amazing.
I mean, I do see work online that's done by Japanese artists who are doing huge glass panels, sandblasted and things like that. I'd love to get a contract like that where I can just go free reign and do something that's as high as an atrium or something.
That'd be
That'd be fabulous,
amazing.
wouldn't it?
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So,
Wow. Well,
yeah.
anybody listening,
if you have a nice big house,
Tell a friend.
I'll do a nice glass mural for you.
And the next question that we want to talk to you is the use of gold leaf.
Well, look, gold is such an alluring material, and it goes back so far in history that I wanted to in my plants is just to show that wild plants are also extremely valuable. And so when I use the gold leaf, sometimes I use it in the glass so that it's on the front of the plant. In this particular situation, I've only put the gold on the back, but the idea was that when the light shines on the plants, as it does, it shines onto the glass from the front, the white wall behind it reflects back the gold that's on the back of the panel. So if you were to turn these panels around, the back of the plant is gold leaf. So it was a little device that I thought would add that kind of extra warmth to the shadow that it's cast. But generally, I'd use gold leaf in the work to emphasize how I feel that the plants are precious. To elevate them.
Yeah. And do you like working with gold leaf?
Oh yeah, it's somehow I suppose everybody's slightly enthralled to gold. It's just a very warm material to work with. It's very delicate. So the gold leaf I use it's thinner than a human hair. In fact, I think a cubed inch of gold leaf, it's beaten so thin to make the gold leaves, which are 2¼ inches square. It's so thin that it would cover a football pitch.
Wow.
So it's like it just blows away, if you touch it, and so it's very delicate to work with. So I'd often you have to have a special brush to lift it, and you actually just use a little bit of the grease off your face to touch the brush onto the gold leaf to lift it. So it's lighter than a feather, really.
It must be amazing to work with.
It's the way it catches the light is wonderful.
Yeah, and it must transform work. It must transform.
It does, and
paintings.
I've done some work where I've mixed different types of gold leaf. So 12-karat gold is white, and 24-karat gold is yellow or red, and you can get quite a range of colors of gold. And I've used those with black and white, or black and shadow, to create like silhouettes. The gold, reflective gold and matte gold together. So there's a piece, if you're ever having tea in the Merrion Hotel, that I did a piece there, which is the front of a bar, and they're large panels with a leaf design on them, using white and red gold and different textures of gold. It's in the garden. What do they call it? The garden restaurant or garden tea room at the back of the hotel. So just tell them you want to have a look at the bar. So.
We'll have to do that next.
Tea is like
we'll have a field trip.
Tea and a cake is €52. So you won't be rushing off there. But the staff, the staff are actually really nice. When you tell them you want to look at the bar and say you know the artist,
Yeah.
they're very proud of it.
Yeah, I think it's
Nice.
beautiful. I have to have a look. You see, And that leads us on to this exhibition. So now we kind of understand, you've shared the influences, which are just amazing, and now your actual practice. And I just feel that the work that you do on glass just adds this fragility. It's so beautiful. The plants are really, they really get to shine and be themselves, and yet it's kind of like there's this fragility, and maybe that's very timely with what's happening in the world at the moment. But when we talk about the exhibition Field of Vision, I thought it would be good to just delve into your interest in nature. You seem to have a profound relationship with nature and the minuscule in nature.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I blame my mother for being so keen on being curious about nature, but we always had this thing about the small plants and how they eke out a living. And so, yeah, I'm fascinated by how things grow and how they have a symbiotic relationship to each other and how they interweave and all those things, like the design in Art Nouveau and the Celtic knotwork. It's all out there. The artists who created that were obviously influenced by what we are surrounded by. And I love to kind of show that slightly chaotic element of what's around us, and then pick out what we want to see and so that we understand. Oh, did I just unplug you? So that we can actually understand the mathematical element. So that because everything is evolved so beautifully, that when you look at how things are growing together and how the animals interact with them and the insects and that, it's all beautifully evolved, and it has that connection with mathematics and science and beauty. So we're going back to William Morris and all those things that it's all interconnected, and we're all part of that as well.
Yeah, it's like the plants have an intelligence. That like you were telling me that the leaves at the very top of an oak, that every leaf on a tree is put in a place where it will get the sun. I mean, it's kind of obvious, but until it's said to you, you go, wow. And that the leaves on the top of a tree?
Yeah, the leaves at the top of a tree are smaller than the leaves lower down, because every leaf has to get a bit of sunshine during some point in the day. So it's beautifully evolved. I mean, you might say it just happens, but evolution and design it's as if they're related. You can see why people believed in a great maker, because it seems so calculated.
Yeah. And in your work and in your observation, you spoke to me about the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio.
Yeah, I know. I mean, one of the things I discovered somewhere along the way was the golden ratio and how it's in everything, even in ourselves. You can, if you Google golden ratio, see that it's even your ear, the inside of your ear is based on the same mathematical equation in that we've got the Fibonacci numbers. Again, it's when the relationship of, say, the spiral in a snail, or how a plant twines itself around something. It's according to the golden ratio, or pi. I wish they'd told me that in school, because I wouldn't have given up maths. I could never get my head around
why. Absolutely.
So it all makes sense when you get an idea of that. And just looking at nature with those little questions as to why does it go around, why do the plants grow in a particular sequence of events, and how beautifully they work in terms of, if something is bending, the cells on one side get shorter and the cells on the other side get longer to make that bend, because it has to reach the light. Just things like that. Just
Fascinating.
fascinating. Absolutely.
So this, when we were talking, you were saying, so all of this deep understanding of nature and your artistic skills and your artistic knowledge and your sense of discovery by creating, by finding what you were interested in and the techniques that you liked, how you could experiment with them to make this kind of work. And you said to me that in your work, you said, I want to use my paintings to make order and disorder visible. That's such a beautiful thing to want to do.
yeah, kind of. I suppose when sometimes people ask about why don't I color everything in? So I might have a drawing where only elements are colored, and that would be a little bit like you can't. When you look at a field, it just looks like a lot of green. But if you pick out single things, and your eyes actually do that. Once, if somebody says to you, go and look at all the daisies in that field, then your mind eliminates all the green and you just see the daisies. I'm sure that's how insects work. That's they're focused on what they need. So when I do a drawing, and a little bit like the piece that the National Gallery acquired, the plants we played with, I only coloured what was relevant to the idea of the things we played with, or the childhood memories of plants. And so it's much easier to see what's going on because you're not confused by too much colour. It has a degree of a design element, I guess, as well.
Yeah. And this exhibition was really, it's very contemporary in lots of ways, and how you've interpreted these some of them very old art practices, but also of its time, because you made it during COVID, and it's in its very design.
Yes, yeah, and it was all about. Well, I was struggling to figure out what I was going to do for this exhibition. Time was running out, and we were in lockdown, and I couldn't go very far, so I decided to just look at what's in my garden, and then I thought about how am I going to present anything up to 100 plants, and we've got just over half an acre, and so I thought about when we were children, we had a microscope, and as a child I was fascinated by the little glass slides, and so I thought, okay, that's a good proportion. Most of the plants are upright and tall, so that was the proportion I decided to work with, and I'm not sure why I came to it being 21 centimeters high, but I guess it's maybe inside me somewhere there was a golden ratio going on there, that it was a nice proportion to use. And so I just started drawing, so that I ended up with, I had 77 drawings originally. I just kind of whittled it down a bit. I could have kept going because I kept going around the garden then later during the summer going, oh, I missed that one. So there's a few plants missing, but it just shows, like, in such a small space, in a garden that's surrounded by fields, that all these beautiful plants can thrive. It's just fantastic. All those different habitats within a really small space.
Yeah. And had you worked in that size before?
I've done quite a lot of small works before. I had an exhibition called Floral Alchemy with Olivier as well, and he's in Temple Bar, and they were based on the proportions of the herbal book plates. So they had a degree of that sort of Celtic knotwork idea in them as well, with the shadows and things.
They're such beautiful works. The next question I'm going to ask you was your reaction to climate change and your ideas. I mean, it's so...
Well, it's so prevalent now that we talk about climate change or changes. In Ireland, we talk about the weather every day. It's the first thing you'd say to somebody, what's the weather like?
It's true.
Whenever I'm talking to my brother in Germany, what's the weather like? But it's very much part of how we live, and I've been aware of climate change or that there is an issue since I was a child, because my parents came from industrialized Germany and were very much aware of acid rain and would be constantly looking out for signs of it happening here, where trees might produce a lot of fruit, particularly pine trees, because they're under stress, and that would be maybe because of a drought or other circumstance or attack by some insect or something like that, which would be unusual. So would have grown up with that awareness that things can change, and we have a very benign climate in Ireland, but we're very much noticing now that things are changing. So when I look at illustrating common wild plants, I'm also thinking about they may not be so common forever. And also when we look at the plants that we've used to cultivate the vegetables that we eat, I think there's only 9 vegetables basically that we're kind of whittling it down to these cultivars and not allowing for the source plant or the genetic material from the plant that it originated from. We're putting herbicides all over that, but we might actually need the seeds from those plants if the plants have to be adapted and genetically modified from the source so that they will survive excessive moisture or excessive drought. You're not going to grow a cabbage in a field that is just pure sand and cracked because it's so dry. So you may have to develop plants that grow better in those circumstances. Or we might actually end up with Ireland being quite cold, so we might have to adapt our plants to deal with a much colder climate and things like that. So we might have to go back to our clovers and vetches to get the genes, because the wild plants, while if the habitat is gone, then we have a problem. But if they're allowed to thrive, and hopefully we are allowing them to thrive, we'll always have those to refer to, and so we should value them. And any habitat can disappear. It could be something you think is so common that you'll never think twice about it, and you could have 2 years of drought and those seeds might be burnt or whatever. So it's all quite fragile. But I think in Ireland we always think we're an exception. Nothing's gonna go wrong. We just need to be aware of it. And not be smug.
The final question that I have for you are, with all your experience, both artistically and you're just so close to nature, and you just shared so much tonight about that, I'd like to ask you, what's the most striking discovery you made through your practice? And also, what's the most striking observation you made? If that's...
I guess they're related, but in terms of discovery, I think the golden ratio and the mathematical aspect of nature was a real revelation, and it constantly inspires me. So I'd be, even if I'm just walking in a field, I'm looking at how things are interwoven, or the exhibition I had with the hedgerows. Everything's so beautifully together and working together, and that sort of symbiosis as well is just I find that fascinating. And in terms of your second question, I suppose it's the symbiotic relationship between plants and animals and every organism there is on the planet, including humans. It's so delicately interconnected, and I don't think we should see humans as separate. We tend to think we're aloof from everything, or we're better than animals, or we're separate somehow, but actually we've been around so long that, particularly a small country like Ireland, is so in every inch of Ireland is influenced by human activity, and we can't just say, oh, we want to rewild and let things go. We actually have to have that relationship, that knowledge and that respect for nature, that we can't just say, oh, sure, nature will do its own thing or whatever. We actually are part of it.
Yeah.
I find that really interesting. I guess the older I get, the more I look back and see how these things are interrelated.
Yeah.
Does that answer the question?
You have answered that question. Well, Yanny, thank you so much.
Well, thank
It was
you,
just
Jean.
lovely to talk to you. And just opening up, anybody have any questions for Yanny?
Am I allowed to, listening to you speak there, just being taken away and captured by the wildflower biodiversity type of thing. When I grew up, the only flowers were roses, tulips, daffodils, and that kind of thing. Anything else that took a scythe to. And now, all of a sudden, down the N11 motorway, they started planting wildflowers.
Yeah.
And the beauty, and it just looks absolutely magnificent. And it kind of changes your whole approach, my approach to how I would look at all these kind of things. One final point, when you're doing all this lovely work, does it ever cross your mind, you refer to insects and things like that, to put a butterfly on them or anything?
Well, I do. So actually, sometimes I do, but I put very tiny insects in. So one of my most popular paintings was actually Lawn Gone Wild, Home of the Little Green Spider, and I put this tiny little dot, which was a little green, and I could have sold that painting many times, but that was because the title more than but yes, I agree with you. We were just talking there about the fact that the county councils are allowing wild plants, are actually planting wild plants along the motorways, which I'm so pleased that that's happening. And one of the things I love seeing is the dandelions in the spring, and how then when they go to seed, you're seeing the seeds being blown along the motorway by the cars, and you know that next year the dandelions will be another half mile up the road. I love that too. And as you said, you do look at plants differently when you compare them to the cultivated plants like your roses and your tulips and things, and compare them to that feast of wildflowers that you see, and also the in the parks, and that there's wildflower meadows. That some of them are actually, they're unfortunately putting down imported seeds, so we need to make sure we're only using Irish wildflower seeds, because the imported ones they'll actually eventually die out. But we don't want to contaminate the seed bank of Ireland by bringing in lots of stuff from abroad. So Sandro Cafola will sell you lovely Irish wildflower seeds saved from Irish meadows. So I'm very firm about that.
Good.
So yeah. Any other questions?
Any other questions?
Just say, Yanny, most people are unaware of what's around them, the sheer variety. So, do you think your work is important in terms of opening people's eyes to see these plants?
Absolutely, yeah. The question was there whether my work helps people to see the myriad of plants that are out there. And one of the most wonderful comments I got from a student of mine was that she said, after the class and we were painting wildflowers, she said, "Thank you, Yanny, for opening my eyes." Yeah. And she went home to her garden, and ever since she rings me every now and then, or texts me every now and then, and says, "Oh, the primroses are out. Would you like to come up and have a look?" So I was really delighted with that, and that's really what it should be doing is that people look at these and say, oh wow, you know, and also putting them relatively high on the wall or making them close to our eyes, because when we're children we're there amongst them, but when you grow up you kind of forget about everything that's kind of below your hips. So bringing them to people's view really helps, I think, for people to see them again and brings back memories. I mean, I've had people actually say they were moved to tears by looking at these plants because it brought back memories of their childhood. So that's really lovely. So thanks for the question.
Yeah.
So anyone else?
That's it.
There's a few comments there online, so maybe Ollie will.
Yes, we leave you. Olivier. Yeah, go on.
No major questions.
No major
Nothing
questions.
further
People
than-
congratulating
Well, thank
you.
you.
So
Thanks to those who are out
For
there.
watching.
Yes.
just a few words, maybe to wrap this up, just to say that Yanny's, well, thanks. First of all, thank you, Jean, for this brilliant
Pleasure.
conversation
My pleasure.
and all the prep that's
My
went with
pleasure.
it. And thank you,
My
Yanny,
pleasure.
for all the answers.
Yeah.
And
Thanks,
just to say that
Thank
the exhibition is running until this Saturday, the 6th of November. And we have actually a finissage at the gallery. So Yanny is going to be here at the gallery this coming Saturday from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. So if any of you would like to come and have a chat with Yanny or not, just look at the exhibition. We'll be here, so just let us know. And again, thank you for those of you who have come all the way tonight to attend this wonderful conversation. And I think that's it for tonight. Yanny, you want to say something? There's a question there.
Will the video be available?
Yes, so the video is right now is being broadcast onto Facebook and YouTube, and it's actually recorded there as well. So you'll be able to watch it later, share it, and things like that. So it's there forever.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you for the lovely comments that are coming in, and thank you, Olivier, for giving us this opportunity. It's been
great.
really good fun, and it's
Yeah.
been great fun
It's lovely.
talking to you.
Yeah, yeah.
So
good.
thank you very much.
Beautiful.
So,
Beautiful work, Yanny.
well done. Thanks very much, and thanks everybody for your kind comments. So, goodbye. So, well done, Olivier. That was really good.
Let's see if I can.
Like it out of your way.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thanks for your questions.
We're still live. For some reason, my cursor. Yeah.
There you go.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
There we go.